Hello and welcome back. This is part two of session one. If you haven't had a chance to watch part one yet, that is titled Canary in the Coal Mine. I invite you to go back and watch that. That is uh, a walk through the foundational biblical passage for me, at least in this current season of my life, that led to my journey down the rabbit hole of trauma-informed care and trauma responsive healing. And it's led me to read the resources that I'm presenting in this study. And it's led me to believe that conversations about trauma and about trauma healing are immensely important, considering what's going on in our world right now. So I invite you to go back and watch that first video for some biblical grounding. This component, the second part, is going to be more of a skill-based piece. And I just want to say I am learning as I go on some of these things. The work of trauma healing, the work of uh, somatic healing, which is something I'm going to be referencing today, is ongoing for me. This is some new concepts for me personally in the last couple of years in my own healing journey. I was just a part of a certification process in something called neurosomatic intelligence this past summer, and that has provided all kinds of information about the nervous system as our base operating system. And if we're not working on healing the nervous system to bring it out of a state of dysregulation, because we are dysregulated all the time, and part of that's intentional, part of that's just the result of having devices on us and the advance of technology, and we haven't figured out how to set good boundaries yet. I say we, but speaking to myself here. So, healing of the nervous system is also going to be a component of this ongoing study. So, I'm presenting some of these things, having worked a little bit with them, and some of the concepts will be part of the ongoing learning process. So, hope that's clear. So, we're going to be in Staci Haines' book, The Politics of Trauma, and the overall arc of her book is based on what she calls the somatic arc of transformation, the somatic arc of transformation. And this is something that she has used in multiple formats. Um, there's a map of it in her book. It is something uh, that they've been using as part of a group called Generative Somatics for many years. It evolved out of somatics work of the Richard Strozzi Heckler, along with the somatics and trauma programs that she launched in 2001. So the idea behind this arc is to go from what she calls a current shape to a new shape. And there are multiple steps along this somatic practice. I'm going to talk about commitment today because commitment refers to what I was talking about in part one about situationally the water that we swim in, to metaphorically say the systems and structures that are present in our world. We inherit them. We inherit systems that marginalize folks. We inherit systems that push people around based on their race, based on their economic status, based on their class status. And so commitment as the first step is part of the healing process. What do we want in healing? What do we want to learn? What have you longed for? And so it begins with declarations and commitments. And Ms. Haynes, if you ever see this, we can talk before you come after me for copyright stuff. Try to be helpful here. Um, so she writes, we begin with the question of possibility and longings to get a deeper sense of what future we are changing toward. So that's the baseline here of commitments. I like this part. In somatics, we understand declarations as an embodied competency. We develop the ability and skill to declare. This is to imagine possible futures, speak them aloud to others, and mobilize yourself and others toward them. This is a powerful skill for healing, for leadership, and for social change. And then underneath that in the margins, I've got a quote from Walter Wink: the future belongs to those who pray and then live those prayers into existence. So connecting that with trauma, trauma keeps us in a locked state. We're in a loop. One way of thinking about it is that we're telling the same story, or our bodies are telling the same story over and over again. And until that story has a resolution or a different ending, it stays in a loop, and there's no possibility for healing. So part of healing trauma is naming it out loud and then moving past it into a new future. Still going to be marked by that traumatic event, but it's not going to have that power to keep the feedback loop in place. The trauma doesn't go away. It just gets reorganized in the body, and I'm still working conceptually on what that is, and so that will develop as we go. But these declarations then move us into a new future. And as she says, it's, about healing, it's about leadership, and it's about social change. So, I think of systems and structures, economically, how do we live economically into new realities? Well, we're not going to overhaul global capitalism or neoliberalism or whatever you want to call it at this moment, but there are ways to live within that bring moments of relief and respite. And I preached on that this last weekend in the parable of the defective manager in Luke 16 about what Ched Myers called monkey wrenching the system. We can't overthrow it, but we can certainly use what we've got to work inside of it to provide relief and to circulate resources in a more humane way. So this is about creating a future and understanding the trajectory of that and putting ourselves into a place where we can move into it. We have to know where we've come from. And this loops back to the Bible study in the first session, the individual in the tombs who can't be chained and shackled, who has been held captive by this force that names itself Legion. And I attributed that to, generational occupation by an opposing military force by the Roman Empire at this moment in history in Mark 5. And that's something that he inherited. The Gerasene demoniac, certainly this wasn't a personal choice that he made to live in the graveyards, to be held captive, traumatized by an occupying military empire. That's not something that he chose. And so economic realities are not something that we as individuals always have control over. Inherited wealth is a huge conversation that we're not having in the United States as we move into this second Gilded Age. Who's got money and why? Where did that money come from? Why are they able to build generational wealth? And why do cycles of poverty continue to happen, even though there seems to be so much money going around out there? So economic realities. We can talk about the inherited racial realities and white supremacy in this country as something that we all inherit, people of color and white folks alike. And it's because we haven't dealt with things historically, and it keeps cycling, repeating, and it keeps traumatizing people. And until we have an honest discussion about it, we're not going to break that loop. And so racial trauma is something that folks inherit. White supremacy is something that folks inherit. Unfortunately, military occupation and the trauma of war is ongoing. And, the United States is one of the greatest purveyors of violence in the world. And that's not news to anybody that's paying attention. I mean, that's what Dr. King said in his Beyond Vietnam speech, Time to Break Silence, at Riverside Church in New York in 67, which is probably the speech that put things into motion that led to his assassination. But he named it, we're the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. And that hasn't changed a whole lot since 67. And so we live as part of a system, whether we consciously want to acknowledge it or not, that traumatizes generations of people. Subconsciously, if we are paying attention, we've inherited a lot of violence and a lot of damage. And for empathetic people, that's sometimes hard to wrap our minds around. And there's a lot of guilt that goes into that, which is not necessarily a healthy component of moving forward, because that guilt can also be a feedback loop. So we have to talk about what we've inherited. And there's a piece here that I really appreciate that Staci Haines offers that moves us to a way that we can declare something new. So she talks very simply, look at the ads, images, definitions of success, safety, desirability, and being powerful that surround us. So what are we marketed on a regular basis TV, internet, like the pop-up ads that like you've Googled something or searched for something on Amazon and immediately you're getting like 1,000 ads for that thing, even though um, you don't need them. Or you said something out loud in a conversation and it all of a sudden appears like your phone's been listening. That ever happened to anybody? It's kind of weird. But we are being force fed an image of what the male looks like, the female looks like, this gendered binary that we're still fighting. And the opposite of that is damaging LGBTQ people, and the attacks on the transgender community right now are part of those things that we've inherited. And certain ideologies push certain ways of being as the end all be all. Um, you know, what do our families inherit? The ideas, the ideologies that have been passed down to us by our parents, grandparents, and then beyond that, 4 or 5 generations back. I think about the my own lineage and me raising kids now and thinking about how I was raised. And then now I'm starting to question, well, my grandparents were children of the Depression. Uh, that absolutely affected the way my parents were raised, right? Grandparents on both sides were they're carrying that trauma from the Depression. And that stuff just doesn't go away. It flows down into generations. And, I'm not calling out anybody here. I'm just stating that those are things that I think about because why am I reacting this way? Well, that might have 2 or 3 generations worth of shaping behind it. I've inherited it. So if I want to see something different in the world, if I want to be different, I'm going to have to work on it. I'm going to have to name it. Otherwise, the feedback loop it is still there. Um, William Stringfellow, the 3 things that he named: ideas, institutions, or images, institutions, and ideologies. The powers language that he wrote about in his book, An Ethic for Christians and Other Aliens in a Strange Land. Um, Brilliant way of talking about this. Images, ideologies, and institutions all have inherent power, all have inherited power, and all, in a way, manipulate and control projections. So, what do we inherit in that sense? Another question: if you had turned out to be just the person and to have just the life that your family or community wanted you to be, who would you be? What would you be doing? What would you care about? What role would you be playing? And so you take that inherited desire and then you run with it without any other thought, like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. What would you be doing? I could run the trajectory of my own life as a middle class white kid from Brenham, Texas, and think there were things that shaped me that could have led to a very different pathway in life. Um, or in his song "A Long Violent History," Tyler Childers, uh, has this line: "What would you get if you heard my opinion? Conjecturing on matters I ain't never dreamed. All my born days as a white boy from Hickman." Like he's naming that reality, and people's expectations of you because of your trajectory and what you've inherited versus how you've turned out. Third category: if you had turned out to be just the person and have just the life that society, not family now, but society wanted you to be, who would you be? And then the fourth one: what did you learn to care about because of the dynamics in your family or those who raised you, because of your family's circumstances? What did you learn to care about? No, what's the focus? I grew up with, in a lineage of farmers and folks who stewarded the land, and so a lot of that is still in me. I have a very uh, passionate approach to making sure that the land is healthy, that ecosystems are healthy, and so that affects choices that I make around my own house, like not spraying pesticides because it kills pollinators, and the choices of what plants I try to plant in flower beds that wind up just being overgrown anyway, or the choice not to mow the yard for the first couple months of the year as things are waking up. That those are things that I care about now that are definitely part of my shaping because my father, my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, they cared about those things. So all of these pieces go into shaping a declaration. what could be different. And I'm going to move into that in another session. So I'm going to do my best to try to type up some of these things. Again, Miss Haynes, I'm sorry if I'm breaking copyright stuff here. Uh, Trying to get the word out. So yeah, appreciate you being a part of this and look forward to two more sessions getting recorded next week. So again, thanks for joining in on this conversation of the intersection of the Bible and trauma. If you haven't yet, please go back and watch the first session, Canary in a Coal Mine. And if you like this and find it stimulating and something that you think worthwhile, like it, share it. We need folks that are doing this work in our world right now. Not something you have to like go back to school and do. Like we can work on this together and the world needs it right now. So please join me. Thanks.